everyone, and welcome. My name is Libby O'Kane, the Events and Visitor Services Manager for the Fowler Museum at UCLA, filling in for our Curator of Public Programs, Bianca Collins. Thank you for joining us today, this afternoon, or tonight, depending on where it is you're tuning in from across the world. It's a pleasure to present today's program, Performing Social Justice Artivism, as part of our Share the Mic series. The Fowler believes in the civic duty of museums to give forum to different points of view. This series shares our platform with thought leaders, artists, activists, and allies who are guiding us along the arc of justice. We are honored to be joined today by LA Commons Karen Mack, comedian and performance artist Kristina Wong, and Chicana feminist Martha Gonzalez of rock band Quetzal. Artivism, a word combining art and activism, emerged as part of the vernacular in recent years. As anti-racism protests proliferate, artists are using their work to catalyze political participation and action in ways that move beyond traditional paradigms of activism. Today, we will hear from each of the guests who will share more about their work, followed by a conversation about how one can powerfully organize and engage hearts and minds by creating a narrative about struggles to promote justice through art. First, a bit about our moderator. Karen Mack is founder and executive director of LA Commons, an organization dedicated to promoting Los Angeles's diverse neighborhoods through locally based, interactive, artistic, and cultural programming. LA Commons has implemented community art projects, tours, and classes in partnership with organizations such as the Fowler Museum, National Endowment for the Arts, LA Department of Cultural Affairs, and LA County Arts Commission. Mack holds an M.P.A. from Harvard University and an M.B.A. from the UCLA Anderson School of Management. She is a past president of the board of the Los Angeles Neighborhood Initiative and of the city's Board of Neighborhood Commissioners. Before we get going, two quick technical bits of housekeeping. Once the screen sharing begins, I encourage you to click View Options and then go to side-by-side mode, so the video feed doesn't cover any of the presentation. If you have questions during during this program, please submit them via the question and answer function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote questions that you would like to be considered to be answered at the end of the program. Okay, that's all. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Libby, and thank you so much to the entire Fowler team for organizing tonight's program. Special shout out to Bianca Collins, wherever you are. It's such a pleasure and privilege to be here to talk about one of my favorite subjects, social justice artivism, which is really at the core of our mission at LA Commons. We really focus on enabling people in diverse communities to raise their voices and share their narratives as catalysts for community change. Our youth, artists, and community members are powerful as they come together to bring their stories to life through art. Here's a short video so you can see some examples of how we do that.
Turn us loose, set us free from all the chains that bind me. Let us run in our own direction. Let us go, let us break from all this propaganda and lies that your people try to teach us. You know why would like to bring us down, because we have all the different.
Oops. Thank you so much. So one of the other reasons tonight is bringing me so much joy is that we have some awesome artivistas with us today. Some of Los Angeles's most dynamic leaders working at this intersection of art and activism. First, we have the amazing Kristina Wong, who, you know, what is so amazing about both of these women is they like bring it all together. So Not only is Kristina a performance artist, comedian, writer, but she's also an elected official. You know, how often do those come together? And we're here, I'll tell you more about her in a few minutes, but first you're gonna get to hear from Martha Gonzalez, Chicana artivista, who, you know, get ready, a singer-songwriter, percussionist, feminist, and associate professor at Scripps College. She is really, well, let me just say this first. One of her most visible roles is as a lead singer of the Grammy Award-winning band Quetzal. I know many of you love Quetzal as much as I do. But she also teaches at the college as well as in neighborhoods. And running through all of this is a focus on bringing to life the stories of her community, often in partnership with the people who live them. I'm going to turn it over to Martha, and she's going to tell you more about what she does.
Hi, thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction, and for the Fowler and Bianca and everybody, Kristina, everybody for being here today. I really appreciate it. It's really a joy to be able to share with you some of the work that I'm engaged in with community. You know, as Karen mentioned earlier, you know, I'm a musician. I've 30 plus years of professional music practice on the stage, but come our recent times, I think it's really important that we challenge the commodification of art and culture, and that is the only way that we can think about art and culture, and not necessarily alienating capital, in the sense that we also have to use our musicianship or whatever artistic practice we are engaged in order to focus on methodologies, right, on certain processes, or music as process as well. And so the short video I'm going to show you right now is some of the work that we've been doing as a band, individually and collectively, through this methodology we call collective songwriting. And so roll the tape.
¿Qué dice eso? A ver, habla un poquito más. Al decir transparencia en la escuela, explíqueme más. ¿Quién dijo eso?
Tiene que trabajar con los padres y darnos el derecho de poder escoger la forma de cómo trabajar con nuestra juventud.
Collective songwriting really brings the community in to do the work of music. It really brings them in to engage in that process. And by having them be a part of that process gives them a sense of ownership to the ideas, to the discussions that are taking place while they're creating music, as a way of articulating something beyond what's written on paper or what's being suggested by somebody else. This is something that music allows them to create for themselves. And I think that has been the most powerful thing to witness in every one of these spaces.
Este evento fue maravilloso, iluminarte, porque me iluminó hasta ser como compositora de canciones. Fue algo muy divertido, expresivo, en donde podemos transmitir sobre el arte, sobre la educación, sobre nuestros derechos, y esto mismo que aprendimos vamos a transmitirlo a nuestros hijos y a nuestra comunidad.
We've had workshops on DACA DAPA and deferred action. We've had workshops on the local control funding formula. We've had workshops on Boyle Heights for youth and youth advocacy in general. We've had workshops on Prop 47 and reduced sentencing. We've had workshops on restorative justice. So we've done a lot of work and put a lot of, have invested a lot of time and energy into this idea of collective songwriting.
The band Quetzal and individual artists that are part of that collective have really been working from a place of deep heritage and community aesthetics and values, and exploring a lot of different kinds of music, and also a process that is part of all kinds of traditional arts, a process that's rooted in community. And so from that emerges Quetzal's collective songwriting methodology, which is very hand in glove with traditional arts processes And so it was very natural evolution for ACTA to really be able to take advantage of these artists who have a lot of experience in this methodology and to bring that to a larger scale in Boyle Heights.
Collective songwriting as a method and the ways in which Chicano Artivistas implement it in community has roots in the Zapatista movement. The Zapatista movement is a movement that really identifies autonomy and self-determination for communities in struggle. A group of Chicano artists, activists, went to Chiapas and studied these methods, and the musicians studying these Zapatista methods developed the collective songwriting method, along with a very important figure in the movement, and her name is Rosa Marta Zarate.
This is coming out of a Chicano tradition, Chicano community that has been doing art and activism for many decades. It's part of the ethos, part of the fabric of the Chicano community.
It's a recycling world. Everybody sing that for me, please. Nice and loud. Da, da. I'm recycling my bad ways to make some better days. It's a recycling world. Again, nice and loud. I'm recycling my bad ways to make some better days. It's a recycling world.
At my mama's face, man, tears in her eyes. Asking God, why did he do this to me? This is playing like a movie. Stuck in the sand, trying to find another plan. I'm not gonna be that bum man, kicking that can. I'm trying to be a grown man, handle my priorities as a young teen minority.
Shine like me, cause everybody's not the same. My dreams is like never ending rain. If you took a couple steps in my shoes, you will feel my pain. Life full of crime, a lot of things in my mind. Teen life's getting took, so I'm trying to refrain. The dirty south is the place from where I came. Trying to make a living, can't hold chump change. Cops killing off African Americans. It's a cold world that we're living in. Can't take it, so you know I find different ways to claim life. So I gotta get it in. Woo!
So this is, so besides being on stage and, proliferating our own artistic work, we are finding ways of utilizing our skill sets to implement processes such as these in different spaces. And so I'll turn it over to Karen and we can talk more about it later.
Thank you, Martha. I didn't realize I was going to get to have Quetzal on this panel too, or Amy. So it's awesome. Like, bring them all. I love it.
Right.
So we're going to bring on Kristina, who's got incredible energy, and I want to challenge you to let me know in the chat what's the same about Kristina and Martha, because that is the Artivism, the superhero costume. Okay, so just let me know. All right. And so Kristina brings her incredible energy to all of the things that she touches, and really works on a range of issues, from celebrating Asian American women heroes to the trials and tribulations of campaigning and holding elective office, to, of course, her amazing feat during COVID, which is organizing the Auntie Sewing Squad, who sewed, get ready, 300,000 masks for vulnerable populations. So if we can talk about a superhero artivist, this certainly is one. So I'm going to turn it over to Kristina so she can let us know how she did that.
Thank you, Karen. I saw a great meme at the top of the pandemic, which said, you call people a hero who do the work that you don't want to pay for. And I'm like, oh, that's us. Unpaid work? Yes, I guess we're totally heroes. So folks, I'm Christina Wong. I wear many hats. I'm a performance artist, a comedian, an elected representative in Koreatown, Los Angeles. I'm right now in front of my set for my show, Kristina Wong for Public Office, which is a show about how I ran and won local office in Koreatown. I wanted to note that I designed this set and I sewed it on a Hello Kitty sewing machine. I actually had to adapt my show for my house. Before the pandemic, I had premiered it at the Skirball last year in February. We all know how that turned out. And I had a tour that was going to happen live up until the election in November, and had to pivot to the internet. Now, first week of March, when I was like, oh my God, I'm non-essential. I went from like having this amazing show and I was going to kick ass across the world to being stuck at home, as we all were, if we weren't essential workers, and going, what do I do with myself? What do I do with myself? I have no income. What do I do? I have no tour. And I was like, oh, I sew set pieces. I've never sewn medical equipment. And I saw an article a friend had sent me about a hospital that was sending along this mask pattern, a Deaconess Hospital approved pattern. Deaconess Hospital is the name of this hospital. And I was like, oh, I have some cotton. I have like a spoil of elastic. I can do this. And I made my first mask on my sewing machine and did what I call was my very naive all health matters moment, where I naively offered out to the internet, if you need a mask or if you're immunocompromised, let me make you a mask. Jean, if you can start the slides. This became the Auntie Sewing Squad. 4 days later, I was just being so inundated with requests from nurses, I don't know if you can see I don't know if they can see that, Jean. It seems like it's tiny on my screen, but I was being inundated with requests for nurses and from nurses and essential workers and everybody. And I had thought that this project was just going to be a couple weeks.
Turn off your camera.
Stopgap until the government. Me turn off my camera. Oh, okay, that'll do it. Okay, so I thought that this would be a temporary stopgap. So now we are still 13. We're still sewing. We're 13 months old. Next slide. We've done a great deal of work in distributing masks to vulnerable communities all over the country. And this includes the Navajo Nation, California farm workers, lots for farm workers, indigenous communities. We are 800 plus volunteers all over the country. We all organize through a Facebook group, which I had started casually just to get a few friends to help me figure out, how do you do this again? How does my sewing machine work again? And now we have a book coming out from UC Press, and we put out political statements. Next slide. This is just sort of a picture of some of our aunties on the upper left-hand corner. That is an actual auntie who passed out at her sewing machine. And we tell the different stories of aunties, and we also work with different mutual aid collectives. What we're doing is mutual aid. I had no idea what mutual aid was until one of the aunties were like, well, this is mutual aid. It's sort of like anarchy meets charity, where, you blow past all the grant writing and all that kind of stuff. And you just get stuff to places it needs to go. And I watched a video about mutual aid and I was like, oh, we're doing mutual aid. Next slide. So this is the stuff that I was sewing before I got into making medical equipment. Sewing was very much an aesthetic of my work. If you see in the middle, I sewed various genitalia. I can't believe like the same skills I used to like make ruffled labia for my stand-up vagina costume would go on later to help protect people from a deadly pandemic, but that's the stuff that happens. I also have a web series called Radical Cram School, which teaches social justice to kids, and some other projects. I have the Artist in Residence in San Diego at the airport. Next slide. So yes, pre-pandemic, I was planning to tour my show, Kristina Wong for Public Office. I ran for office 4 years ago, or November 2016. I realized that artists and politicians had switched jobs. They were now creating the shock and spectacle that have us questioning reality. We are the ones who are now reclaiming the quiet space for social change and truth. And as someone who used to use a lot of satire to kind of show how absurd the world was by playing out in an even more absurd way, satire didn't make any sense. In fact, it became a liability to everything I cared about, because the real thing was just so crazy that I couldn't outshock a shock administration. I couldn't outshock sort of news that read like the Onion headlines. And I woke up one day after having made 2 attempts at writing a play about the state of the world, and was like, you know what, it's not going to cut it for me to write a play about how crazy the world is and try to get that produced. I'm going to run for office and do a show about that. And so now I serve a unpaid office on neighborhood council in Koreatown. I was recently reelected with a total of 19 votes. I was running unopposed. So there goes the neighborhood. It is the smallest rung of local government, but it is a city clerk mediated election. And look, I'm touching people because it's February in that photo. And that has very much been the theme of the last few years, is that artists have taken on the jobs now, not just of politicians and culture makers and FEMA, but everything else. And it's sort of a theme that I've already seen happen in my work. And now I'm just like leaning into it. Because for many years I was like, I just want to make pretty things as an artist. And I now realize I think the arts are our last hope. But next slide. I'll take you back to some of my earliest work 20 years ago when I was a student at UCLA. I did a project called BigBadChineseMama.com, which is a fake mail order bride website that this is pre kind of Google search engine optimization. You could look for mail order bride and find my fake mail order bride website, which is still on the web. Next slide. I do a lot of solo shows. My very first solo show was a show called Miss Chinatown Second Runner Up, where I had fancied myself a slow moving performance artist. And as it turns out, not many people wanted to produce my very first show, which went up at Highways, where I had blood menstruating on my paint blood on me. And so I decided to, next slide, go out as a character named Fanny Wong, former Miss Chinatown Second Runner Up. And I would crash pageants, Miss Chinatown pageants, and events where the actual Miss Chinatown court came. And this was an aesthetic of my work that I think sort of remains now, is that this sort of disruption of real and performative. Next slide. Here I am crashing a red carpet event. And so I've done different projects. Next slide, I think we'll show you like this one where I show up dressed as the bride of Jeremy Lin. So I actually crashed a red carpet and did an interview with international news outlets. And a lot of people were like, well, why did you pretend to be Jeremy Lin's wife? And it was because I was in my 30s, unmarried, no kids, and was like, rather than live with that anxiety secretly and that shame of being an unmarried Chinese woman, I'll just play it out publicly by showing how ridiculous it is that we're so obsessed with getting married by being married with this basketball player. That's my justification. Next slide. One of my first shows, or my third solo show, I call it, but it feels like the first because it was 15 years ago, was Wong Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Next slide, which explores the high rates of depression and suicide among Asian American women. In the show, I play a character named Kristina Wong, who sets out to fix the high rates of depression and suicide with her show, with her amazing solo show, and begins to unravel and fall apart in the process. Because she is so dead set on making the show fiction. It's not about anyone. It's research based on other people outside the Wong family. And as it turns out, this sort of reluctance to be put in a position of shame or show that anything is wrong is sort of the reason why this problem persists in Asian American communities, is the deep shame, which this character of Kristina Wong is desperately trying to hold up. Next slide. Another project I've done more recently in the last few years is a web series called Radical Cram School. And I described that I teach social justice to kids, and we're like this Girl Scout group. And I'll just, long story short, next slide. The series was called The Most Shockingly Racist Video You've Ever Seen by Alex Jones of InfoWars. So I guess apparently he doesn't watch his own show, and my web series hit that mark for him. But this is a lot of the territory and where my work sometimes runs, as I press up and up against pop culture that I've been called an alleged comedian by Ben Shapiro. I've had no shortage of threatening messages sent to me by right-wingers, but this is where my work operates, plays into. I'm not seeking to bait these kind of folks, but for them, this is where it's also very tricky to do anything that's self-satirizing, because they seize upon it as like, look, she's indoctrinating children. She's something. So, someone says they can't see the slides on the Q&A. I don't know what that means. But anyway, so we can talk about that more, but that's to set some context about where my work operates and how it disrupts real life and sort of a set performative stage.
Awesome. So let's get ready to have a convo here, Martha. You can turn your camera on and we will get to it.
Okay.
The Artivista superheroes. You know what this, like thinking about your work, and just again, thank you so much for those presentations, along with ours, and this moment that we're in where it seems like, you know, everything is, you know, sort of in challenge, for lack of a better word. You know, we have all of these systems that are falling apart and people are suffering as a result. You know, what is our role as artivists to really, or what can we do? Where is our power to really, you know, sort of bring forth the transformation that we have the opportunity to do right at this moment?
I think, well, this whole, if we're referencing the pandemic, this moment has really just all thrust us into a place. Like for me, it was this immediate crisis point. And for me, if you told me you'll still be sewing a year from now, I would have been like, oh, no, okay, let me just figure out a way around this. And believe me, at the top of all this, I was trying to figure out how to buy my way out of it. Like I had all these donations from people, but there was no elastic on the market. Like this country was not prepared for this pandemic. We were not prepared for a home sewing movement. And so it was completely scrappy to find materials, and that became its own project. And then it became really clear, like these hospitals that are asking us for masks, they have communications teams. So who are all those communities that have no access to language, the internet, healthcare, things like that? And how do we find them and get them these masks, right? But it was just like the complete crisis of it and the complete shutdown of all the fields we were working in that sort of plunged me forward. And now I mean, I don't know, maybe folks can name in the chat, like what are things that you're doing now that you never were doing 14 months ago, right? And I think for me, I've learned about the generosity of the other aunties in a group, and I have all these relationships now that aren't as transactional as my last relationships have been when I used to operate before in a marketplace, and I would relate to you because you might be able to book me or, you know, bring me to your class. But now it's just like, oh, you have fabric, great, let me give you my address, and I'll give you, you know, I'll give you a couple of masks that you need for your family, and you bring me this. And it was like this very interesting way to reconnect to other human beings because capitalism had failed us.
I'm glad Kristina mentions capitalism, because I think that it has in and of it, capitalism in and of itself has sort of, you know, overdetermined our realities, right? And including the artist since the beginning of the industrialization of art, music, you know, duplication, right? You know, so that an artist is somebody who is considered an artist because they have product, right? They sell, they're booked, all of these things, right? And that's important. And there is a social system in place that upholds that, right? Including a political system, the capitalism, right? There's nothing wrong with that. We have a system in place, that's fine. But I think that it now is the time as artists for us to begin to utilize our skill sets, not just in proliferating our own careers, but also in engaging in process-based work. Very much the same way that Kristina is doing auntie sewing circles, and the kinds of conversations that take place there, I can imagine are just amazing, or amongst themselves. And you know, those processes of things that are happening as the aunties are sewing and sharing and stories and so on and so forth, is the same idea behind the collective songwriting that we do. And that is that collective songwriting and utilizing our skill sets as musicians in bringing communities together to discuss, to dialogue, whatever is on their minds, what the future world we want to see. All of these things are really important for us as artists to also engage in. Because one thing we have learned about capitalism and our product-centered world is that, you know, capitalism can sell anything. It could even sell revolution, right? So you can package it, put a barcode on it, and everybody will buy it, and it's something trendy, or it's the t-shirt, or it's whatever it is that espouses a political message, right? But beyond that, there's very little that could actually happen that is sustainable, right? And those are the things that we need to begin to focus on as well, right? So besides our own careers, it's also about developing these methods, this way of building culture and community that is beyond the confines of how capitalism defines the artist as it is, right?
So how do we do that? Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, but I want to say, which leads to that question, how do we do it? I feel like as an artist, I've gotten to see like, oh, what I'm doing with Auntie Sewing Squad is what it would look like if an artist ran FEMA. And and the way we relate to different communities, and the way we find these communities, and we use the connections and the people we're passionate, and our instincts around, I think it's time to stop sewing for hospitals and start sewing for, you know, because our labor is not unlimited in quantity. We should figure out where it would have the most impact, which is kind of capitalist, right? In thought, like we invested, but it's different, right? And we have this whole system of care because we don't pay people to sew, and it became very obvious to me that if we ran like a top-down factory where people just worked towards a certain efficiency, people would be burnt out and they would stop, or they would leave, or they would demand pay, which I couldn't give them. And we had to figure out another way that people would want to stay, you know, all the words are capitalist, stay bought into the community. And so we have the system of care where if you don't sew, maybe you can sponsor a pizza. And we're not food insecure necessarily, right? Like, but you can sponsor a pizza or send a note of encouragement. And then our sewing group is very social, and we talk about things like white supremacy. We talk about Black Lives Matter. We talk about these things, whereas other sewing groups were very much focused on, we're going to sew and we're going to sew and sew. We're not going to, you know, talk. We're going to stay out of politics, just going to make the work happen. And those groups disbanded very quickly after they just sort of covered the initial needs in their neighborhoods. But I think for us, we were like, building the community is the buy-in, is the thing that makes people want to keep doing this. Our aunties have jobs. They're not doing this because they're secretly hoping that we get to a point that they can get paid, but they're doing this because it gives them a sense of belonging and purpose to sew and to connect with other people who care about similar things, and that we also find ways to consciously care for each other. And that's community building.
And so I'm hearing community building. I'm hearing you know, sort of thinking about your work, Martha, doing this development, human development. I know for a fact from our work, narrative change, you know, the arts can have an impact on so many realms. You know, so again, how do you, you know, move forward in this moment to, you know, get to the change we need? How do you blend this art and activism to and continue your work as an artist, really, which is, you know, kind of at the core of your being, really, in order to, you know, get us to the next place?
Well, I think that, you know, we need a lot of dialogue. And that is the thing about these processes, right? This we've been in the pandemic, we've been doing collective songwriting workshops via Zoom. I just finished doing, just to show you what the possibilities are, I did 7 different collective songwriting workshops via Zoom with 6 different choirs across the nation. San Francisco Girls Choir, Boston Choir, Pisintu Choir, Communication, 6 different choirs through the Radcliffe Choral Society at Harvard. And one of the things that we all agreed on before we broke off into every choir's agenda was that we all decided to answer to Amanda Gorman's poem, The Hill We Climb, right? So we as choirs are answering to a poet artist, right? An artist and the charge that she's giving us, right? The homework that she's giving us. And so our job was to come together and write a song based on a response, any kind of response. And these are things that we discussed repeatedly, right? Oh, we need to do these, like, and again, the dialogue that needs to happen has to continue, right? One thing that I think that in social movement in this country that we've gotten caught up in, that I think is something to consider quite seriously, is this impetus or this instinct to constantly put out fires, because there's always injustices, right? We're always finding out the next Black man who got shot down, right? The Asian American woman who was elderly, who was beat in the corner in San Francisco, or like, right? All of these things continue to happen, and we need to definitely be there and react. But I think we also need to spend the energy and the ongoing dialogue and work it takes to build that world we want to see, continue to discuss what are the things we need to keep going, what are the cultures we need to set in place, how are our different communities continuing to build together and not just in silos, in order for us to be able to combat this greater system who's coming down on all of us in very unique ways, but nevertheless it's the same system, right? And so this is the ongoing dialogue and work that we need to keep having, that we're so busy putting out fires that so many people have burned out, they die of illness, they sell out because this shit is like impossible to beat, right? All of these things, it can lead to hopelessness, right? But if we do things that are based on creativity, right? Things that are giving us energy, that are generative, like collective songwriting, like the auntie sewing circles, right? All of these things are building
story sharing. Oh yes,
story sharing. Yeah. Exactly. These are things that are giving us energy, right? That are not just consistently taking from us and beating down on our hopes and our ways, right? We're continuing to build and to dream. We're not just consistently putting out fires that end up exhausting everybody and making people sick. We need to think about the culture we need to build in place so that we can keep and sustain this social movement that is obviously going to outlive us. We're not going to see the end result, but we need to work on creating the culture that we need to establish and keep in place so that we can do this in the long haul and teach our children and our grandchildren the kind of work that we need to keep going, so that one day we will see this change. We will not see it in our lifetime, I don't think, but I think we could be part of sustaining that culture, creating and sustaining that culture.
I love that, and I love it. I love the response to the what a creative act to get these choirs to respond to the poem. Kristina, do you want to respond to the prompt here?
Yeah, I think this has definitely been a moment to reconsider like generosity and also care. And and these, like, we've all had to stay in. Some people don't adhere to that, but but as a gesture to take care of each other, right? And to care for others. And it's not about you. It's not about the fact that you won't get the virus. It's about, you know, just making it easier on the hospital system so that they can they can manage a second spike, and so people aren't being treated in gift stores, which was happening anyway, right? But to really think about if we, I mean, so much of this about this whole last year has been about like what a model of community looks like when we have to step outside, when cash is like the least important thing, and the most important thing is labor and taking care of the people who are sewing and making, and then getting that to other communities that we will never meet, and we'll never know if it helped them or not, right? But that has been huge to kind of reconsider that for me in this past year, and to see how much it has preserved the aunties to have this sort of social community rooted in generosity towards others.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is that is the thing, is like that's the gift of coronavirus, actually, which, you know, I think of her as our hero in a couple of different ways. I'm not going to talk about the first one because I don't want to get too political, but you know, this gift of, you know, the opportunity to do things differently, to kind of connect with, you know, what's really important. And I think we all are missing our sense of community, which is one of the things that art does so, you know, artistic engagement does so well. And, you know, just to really be able to build on that post-pandemic, like how are we going to hold on to, you know, this learning that, you know, it's funny, we watched this documentary over the weekend called My Octopus Teacher.
Oh yeah.
Which I recommend to everyone, but like my pandemic teacher, like what are we gonna learn? Wouldn't that be a good movie, like to just talk to everyone about what they've learned, and in particular talk to artists, social justice artivists, and how are we going to take these learnings? How do you see your work transforming to meet this new moment, this new opportunity? Any thoughts on that? I mean, do you think about how you're going to change your work as a result of this moment that we've been through?
Well, part of the work that I do in terms of as a musician and in engaging in the collective songwriting workshops, right, is I'm really trying to establish that culture of collective songwriting. So we've had many years now. The first time we've ever learned this process, and we've been refining it over the years, is 1997, right? In the mountains of Chiapas, as you saw some of the footage, you see actual footage of the first time we had been engaged in this process. And fast forward into now, we've actually mentored other musicians and artists on how to conduct these workshops, what to look out for, best practices, all of these things. Part of the ethics of it is that we pass it on, expecting that it will outlive us, right? And that we don't own this process at all, that we're sharing it with as many people as possible. You know, I mean, I charge for my labor, of course, and I engage in it. And if some organizations, I shouldn't say this out loud, don't have the funds, then we won't charge, right? And we of course, we're always vetting like who can and who can't, because at the end of the day, we live in a capitalist society, and we want to make sure that as artists, we are also valued for our work, right? That is something really important. So there are two different value systems, right? When I'm really dealing with capital, like, of course, I'm demanding a certain, like, we need to, I believe that the artist should keep their intellectual property. There are things that we need to have in place. And then there's this social work, right? This other kind of work, the process-based work, which is, for me, where artivism comes from, because artivistas or artivism, to me, signals to process more rather than an artist who does political work, right? Who uses their creative work as a political vessel. That's different, right? Some of the ways is mentorship, right? You have to make sure that whatever it is you're doing, you're taking somebody along with you. Mentorship is a big one. And the fact that we are starving for community right now. Like we are so alienated from each other more than ever, more than capitalism could have ever done it, because capitalism is alienating, it's highly individualistic, right? Community is nowhere in the equation. It doesn't count. If you're an aging person, you can forget it. You're no good to capitalism anymore, right? All of those things we need to push back on, those value systems. And the more we can do it as artists and bring other people in and doing it in a creative way, getting people to think critically, we know that art can do that, right? It breaks apart signs, symbols. It has a way of tapping into human beings' creativity that leads them to a kind of critical consciousness that you couldn't do any other way, right? With a high-end academic reading or any kind of lecture or a boardroom meeting, like none of that can do what art can do when you do it in community. And that's what we need to focus on more than anything, is doing as much as we can in community, being present, using our skill sets or God-given talents, whatever you want to call them, in order to bring communities into re-inscribing, getting people to remember what it's like to be in community again and the joy that can be.
Kristina, you want to?
Yeah, I think a lot of artists are thinking about like, oh, when this is over, like this is like an incubation. And it is sort of an incubation, I feel, because I've been so active, like feverishly active in the pandemic. Like this is the shift I've been making, and my new performance work is about the Auntie Sewing Squad. Can you hear me okay, Karen? I see you leaning in. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
Sorry.
But this is, it went from like being like, this will just be 2 weeks and I'll go back to thinking about, you know, what my show will be when we're out of this. But and I do think everyone's work as an artist and human being, your life should shift after this. Like this is a huge break in how we're going to remember time, before the pandemic, and then after the pandemic. And if everything just kind of goes back to what it was, which clearly wasn't working, I don't know. I know there are things that we
wasted pandemic, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, there should be some sort of shift. So for me, it's kind of rethinking what it means to build a community built on generosity. But there's some interesting things that have happened inside our sewing group, like the white aunties created a breakout group to be white allies and to learn more about anti-racism, and not everyone's on the same political page. But because we were so focused on this task of mask making versus like, this is a Facebook group where we just talk about race, where everyone would have probably like fought each other and we would have imploded in a week, because we're like hyper focused on like, okay, we have to get these masks out to people. And then these other discussions about these communities would happen. We were able to move past things that would have just imploded, I think, and move past conflict through it, I guess. And some of us are still working through some issues with it, but becoming literally more the circle where people are sitting and talking and understanding things. And I like that, because I feel like what I witness so much of is people canceling each other and fighting with each other online, dragging each other, and then that's it. And it just becomes this game of humiliation. And I've witnessed us make better attempts to kind of learn and support each other through learning and educating each other.
So you both are so inspiring, and I just love it, because I feel like I'm on this panel with sisters in arms for sure. We're going to move to questions, and there's a really interesting question, I think, that is both very specific but also broad. And someone really asked about, you know, kind of your work, Kristina, which has been a lot about Asian empowerment of Asian women. And then you've got this anti-Asian thing going on. So, you know, how do you respond to that as an artist? But then the bigger question is, we've got this, you know, really this really strong, hate that's running through our society in general. So how do we as artivists really respond to really what is one of the most challenging and largest issues of our time?
Yes, thank you for the question, Princess. It's good to see you here. We're definitely, for Asian Americans, this feels like a second spike of its own. Like we've gone through the sort of health crisis, and now For a lot of East Asians my age and younger, this is the first time we've experienced what it's like to feel that our faces might provoke violence with just us walking down the street. And that's been really scary. And it means that for a long time, Asian Americans who've sort of been like, oh, I mean, I was raised, don't rock the boat. This is just the way it is. This is the way you work around it. You just study really hard and get a lot of degrees and get a good job. And that is how you will pull out ahead, not by shifting the system of inequity or what's not fair about the system, by just working really hard. And that's not going to work anymore for this. And this is this huge reckoning moment. I live in Koreatown, obviously, where I'm a public rep, and have witnessed the Stop the Asian Hate campaigns. And I would say we're learning. We had this March rally, and I was like, this is the first time I've been in a rally of mostly Asian people. And it feels clear that it is our first rally because we're not good at chanting. We got to work on some chants. We could probably do some education about the All Lives Matter signs and maybe not bring those to the next rally. We can maybe not bring the Asian Lives Matter signs, still co-opting Black Lives Matter, you know. But who are we also yelling at this? Because what I think some Asian folks know that it's about, when we say stop Asian hate, we're not just yelling at the people who might attack us. We're really talking about a system of white supremacy and racism that we are trying to dismantle. However, there are other people who might be thinking they're just yelling right at the person who might be attacking them and not thinking about structurally where that hate came from. So there's a huge learning curve that needs to happen there. And I think this is where artists will help shift that culture, because it can't just be a culture where we scream, stop, no, stop. It's not sustainable, right? We need to have something we sit in, that we make our own. So that we don't become people whose identities have become a race and all we do is yell at people all day, right? It's important to yell at people and shame people, right? But we have to also have this identity outside of that. So those are big things I'm witnessing with this movement that I'm thinking of as artists. A local organization here in Koreatown came for funding for a brochure campaign that would alert Korean seniors in Korean. This is what a hate crime is. This is how you scream for help. Make sure you call the police if something happens. And when this was proposed to us, we were like, it's great that you're trying to address this, but is the first solution to call the police? Like this kind of brochure only puts the person in power right in the moment they're being attacked, and after to find recourse, right? Like, how do we empower other communities to be bystanders, to step in and stop something from happening, to recognize that what's happening is wrong and that they can be empowered to also stop it. So there's a lot culturally that needs to shift. And even in small community organizations here, those are the building blocks to how we get around this thinking. They're not there yet, right? And this is not every organization. But these are just some examples I've noticed where I'm like, okay, how do we do this? And it's art.
And part of how you do it is dialogue, right? You need to have an ongoing, sustained dialogue with the aunties, different ages, different languages, like all of these different ways that we can tap into the different communities. And we already have a system in place for so many communities that are still connected to their root cultures, right? There are practices, there are communal practices all the time, like, whether it's, for us as Mexicanos, for example, we have everything from food like tamaladas during Christmas time, which is people getting together making tamales, right? It's just something we do. The kinds of dialogues that can happen in putting tamales together are incredible. You learn so much about your family history as it is when it's happening within your family. Now, can you imagine in community? Collective songwriting workshops, of course, but there are other things like, every culture has their way of bringing communities together, right? Korean communities have this, Mandarin, Cantonese communities, all of the communities, we all have these root cultures, that we can draw from, right? Our cultural practices that we can already draw from to bring communities together and then be deliberate about the kinds of conversations we want to have in a very non-threatening way, right? We're not lecturing at people. We're just kind of throwing questions out there, and people can just start like thinking these things. And again, it's going to take time. It's not going to happen in a year, in a couple months. We need to be committed to the sustained, ongoing work that it would take. And as artists, we need to know how we can, and at all moments and at all turns, we can insert ourselves in certain places and feel it out and say like, hey, you know, bring our skill sets in.
Amen. We have a last question that actually is a kind of a great way to go out on, because we only have a few more minutes left. And it's kind of a question, it's an answer to a question. And I love it because it kind of is pointing to one of our initiatives, which is called Creating Our Next LA. And that's creatingournextla.com if you want more information. We need teams of artists who recognize their role as educators, healers, and collaborators, bringing their tools into diverse communities. Stories need to be told, and where new systems of care need to be imagined. And I would say not the artist coming in, but the artist, you know, emerging from those communities, because that is, I mean, there are artists in every community and they are amazing. And so we just need to tap what's there. The person says most artists are not trained to have permeable egos and to be of service of their community. So this is one of the challenges. But like, if you get the right artist, you do have a permeable ego. Not that we shouldn't train those artists to, you know, be able to work in community. It is very important time to build cultural democracy. How do you feel we can create squads of creatives to dive into this work? As artivists, what do you hope Angelenos have learned from the pandemic? How do you hope we will have grown? And since it's 5:59, I'm just going to say, let's come to creatingournextla.com, and we can work on it together. And hopefully Kristina, Martha, and I can move from this conversation and really build on the ideas that have been generated today. I want to say thank you guys so much for joining in this conversation, and you know, just bringing your dynamic selves and being an inspiration, as you always are, to our audience, both here in Los Angeles and around the globe. And I'm gonna turn it over to Libby so she can do the formal close.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Kristina.
Thank you so much to Karen, Kristina, and Martha for joining us today. It's so inspiring to learn about the work you're doing and the intentions behind it. We're so grateful for artists like you who use your influence to help make the world a better place. Thank you to everyone who joined us. The program has been recorded and will be available immediately on our Facebook and in the next few days on our Instagram and on the Fowler website for you to revisit and share. Thank you to everyone who came tonight. We hope you'll join us again for our next program. Details can be found on the closing slide. Have a great weekend, everyone.